A millionaire sees his employee on her knees, begging him to stop, but he cannot hear what. He only sees tears, hands together, a fear that has no name. Isabel had lost everything years ago, the man she loved, the children who never came, the life that could have been, until that baby cried in her arms, and she understood that sometimes saving someone is the only way to save yourself. Like this, if it touched your soul, it is more than a click. It is a silent hug between those who know what it is to lose. Comment how you think this story will end. And if you have not subscribed yet, it costs you nothing. But for us, it means the whole world. Thank you for being here. The sun of Charleston fell low over the light stone walls, pulling long shadows between the trees around the house. The house was not new, but not old either. It belonged to that middle time where money had polished every mistake without erasing the memory of what was. Isabel Smith knew every corner of that place like a mother tongue, without translation, without effort, by pure repetition. She had arrived 12 years ago, when Mr. Miller was just a name on papers and the halls still smelled of new paint. Now, those same halls kept her personal smell, lavender in the morning, herbs in the afternoon, and always the weak smell of the tea she made before sleeping. Isabel was 53 years old, with a soft face marked by lines that spoke more of care than of time. She wore her hair in a simple bun, dark dresses without art, flat shoes that made no noise against the floor. Her voice was low, measured, the type that does not interrupt other people's talk. Most people looked at her without really seeing her. It had always been like that. That was how she had learned to move through the world. But there was something no one knew about Isabel. She listened, not like someone who spies, but like someone who pays attention. She knew the firm step of Alexander Miller coming down the stairs before dawn, the way he dragged his right foot a bit when he was tired. She knew the exact sound of the front door closing when he left for the airport, different from the hard hit it made when he returned angry from a bad meeting. And above all, she had learned to know the cry of Thomas. The baby was 11 months old. He was born in February, in the middle of a storm that took tiles off the roof and left the streets wet for 3 days. Isabel remembered that night because it was the last time she saw Mrs. Miller alive. Catherine Miller had died 3 weeks after the birth. No one spoke of it. The doctors used technical words that sounded far away. Alexander signed papers, closed doors, hired more staff. But the silence that stayed in the house was not a miss of noise. It was the presence of something not said. Since then, Isabel had become necessary, not because she asked for it, but because Thomas looked for her. When he cried in the middle of the night, she was already in the hall. When he had a fever, her hands found the exact water temperature to lower the heat. When he laughed, and he did it little, as if he did not yet trust the world, it was because Isabel made hand signs against the wall, shadows that looked like birds or rabbits. The boy did not call her Mom. He did not speak yet, but his eyes looked for her when someone unknown entered the room. That morning, Isabel went up to the second floor with Alexander's breakfast tray. Toast, orange jam, black tea, coffee, a small glass of water, always the same. She knocked twice before entering. He was in front of the window, tie not tied, phone at his ear. He was talking to someone who seemed not to understand him. He raised a hand without looking at her, pointing to the table. Isabel left the tray and went out without a noise. Passing in front of Thomas's room, she stopped. The door was a bit open. Inside, standing by the crib, a blonde woman watched the baby with a hard face. Lucy Montgomery had entered their lives 6 months ago. Tall, elegant, with the kind of beauty that seemed to need constant work. Perfect nails, hair with no piece out of place, makeup applied with perfect care. She spoke little, smiled less, and when she did, it was with her lips only. Her eyes stayed cold as if they were always counting the value of everything around her. Alexander had met her at a business dinner in New York. Lucy worked in public relations for a luxury company. She knew what to say, how to dress, when to be quiet. For a man like Alexander, a new widower busy with the work of raising a son alone while growing his business, Lucy had seemed like the perfect solution. But Isabel had noticed things. The way Lucy never touched Thomas by choice. How her face became tight when the child cried. The times she had suggested with a sweet voice that maybe it would be better to hire a full-time nanny, a professional, so Alexander could focus on work. And above all, Isabel had seen the look. It was a quick look, almost invisible, that Lucy gave the baby when she thought no one watched. It was not hate. It was something colder. It was as if the child was a block, a stone in a path that had to be moved. "Good morning, Isabel," Lucy said without turning, her voice soft like silk. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery." "How many times must I ask you to call me Lucy?" she asked with a playful tone, finally turning. She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Soon I will be part of this family. There is no need for so much formality." Isabel nodded a bit without an answer. Lucy held her look a moment too long, then looked again at Thomas, who slept on his back with closed fists by his head. "He sleeps a lot, doesn't he?" Lucy said. "It is normal for his age." Lucy put a hand toward the crib, but she did not touch the child. She pulled it back as if she changed her mind. "Did Alexander eat breakfast?" "I just took the tray up." "Perfect." Lucy walked to the door, stopping. By Isabel. "I will need you to prepare the main room this afternoon. Some friends are coming, nothing formal, just tea." "Of course." Lucy left, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. Isabel stayed still, listening to the steps go away down the hall. Then she went into the room, closed the door with care, and went to the crib. Thomas was still sleeping. His lashes made tiny shadows on his cheeks. Isabel put out her hand, barely touching the back of her fingers against the baby's head. He was warm, breathing with calm. "Don't worry," she whispered, though she knew the child could not hear her. "I am here." Outside, beyond the windows, clouds began to gather over the hills. The wedding was set for March. It was 4 months away. Isabel knew because she heard Alexander talking on the phone with the event planner, picking the date in the south garden of the house. Lucy wanted something small, she had said. Just close family and choice friends. No more than 50 people. Since the news of the wedding, Lucy's presence in the house had become constant. She no longer came just on weekends. Now she had her own room in the East Wing, a full closet, and an opinion on every detail of the house. She had fired 2 workers in the last weeks, one for folding towels wrong, another for serving wine at the wrong temperature. Isabel knew her turn would come. Lucy watched her with curiosity and doubt, like someone studying a piece that does not fit in the puzzle she is making. That afternoon, while Isabel prepared the room for Lucy's tea, she heard pieces of talk. Lucy's friends spoke in high voices about dresses, honeymoons, and decor. One of them spoke of Thomas. "And the boy? Will he live here after the wedding?" There was a short pause. "Of course," Lucy answered naturally. "He is Alexander's son, though we are looking at more structured options for his care." "A boarding school?" "Maybe. It is important he gets the best school early." Lucy lowered her voice, but Isabel, who was fixing the curtains by the open door, could hear every word. "And honestly, I think so much attention from house staff is not healthy for a child. He grows bad attachments." The women laughed softly. Isabel felt something cold in her chest. It was not a surprise, it was a fact. She finished her work and went to the second floor. She found Thomas awake in his crib, making sounds without sense while looking at the wood toy hanging over his head. When he saw Isabel, he put out his arms. She picked him up, feeling the familiar weight, the heat, the small fingers in her shirt. She took him to the window. Outside, the sky had turned grey. Outside, the sky had turned grey. Isabel rocked Thomas softly, feeling the weight of his head against her shoulder. The boy began to suck his thumb, a sign he was sleepy. "Shh, little one," Isabel murmured. "Everything is fine." But she was not sure she believed it. The door opened without warning. Lucy walked in with a firm step, the wedding ring shining on her left hand. It was a large diamond set in platinum. It was worth more than everything Isabel would earn in 10 years. "Ah, here you are." Lucy stopped halfway. "I need you to go down. My guests want more cookies." "Right away, miss." Isabel tried to pass, but Lucy did not move. "Do you always carry him like that?" she asked, looking at Thomas with a frown. "When he is restless, yes. Children must learn to calm down alone." Lucy crossed her arms. "Too much help is not healthy." Isabel pressed her lips. She knew she should be quiet, that talking back to the future lady of the house would be a mistake, but something in Lucy's tone, in the way she looked at Thomas as if he were a problem to solve, made the words come out before she could stop them. "With respect, miss, he is 11 months old. He needs touch." Lucy narrowed her eyes. The silence became thick between them. "I know you have been here a long time, Isabel, that you feel part of this family." Her voice was soft, dangerously sweet. "But things are going to change, and you better adapt." She left without waiting for an answer. Isabel felt the floor move under her feet. 2 weeks later, Alexander said he would travel to Chicago for 3 days. Urgent business with investors. He kissed Thomas on the head, told Isabel he trusted her, and left before dawn. Lucy stayed in the house. The first day went with a tight calm. Lucy spent hours in her room, talking on the phone, looking at decor books. Isabel kept Thomas busy in the playroom away from her path. The second day, the weather changed. Not just outside, where dark clouds grew over the hills, but inside the house. There was something different in the air, an invisible power that made Isabel jump at any noise. In the afternoon, while Isabel made dinner, Lucy came down to the kitchen. She never did that. The kitchen was for the staff, and Lucy was careful with ranks. "Where is the child?" she asked without a start. "In the living room, miss, playing with his blocks." "Go get him, I need to talk to you." Isabel dried her hands with a cloth, her stomach tight. She went to the living room and found Thomas exactly where she had left him, building towers and then knocking them down with soft laughs. She picked him up, feeling his heat, and slowly went down the stairs. Lucy was waiting in the sitting room, standing by the window, watching the storm that was coming. When Isabel entered, she did not turn right away. "Sit him on the sofa," she ordered. Isabel obeyed, putting pillows around Thomas so he would not roll. The child looked at her with big eyes, confused by the change in routine. "Alexander and I have been talking about the future," Lucy began, finally turning. "About what life will be like when we marry." Isabel stayed silent. "We believe Thomas would gain from a more professional world. A nanny with papers, maybe a school program." Lucy walked toward the sofa, her heels clicking against the floor. "Your work has been fine, Isabel, but it will no longer be needed." The words fell like stones. "Are you firing me, miss? I am changing things. There is a difference." Lucy smiled, but it was an empty smile. "Of course, you will get a good letter. I don't want you to think we do not value your work." Isabel looked at Thomas. The child had started to get restless, sensing the tension. "Mr. Miller did not say anything about this, because he does not know yet." Lucy leaned forward a bit. "But he will. Understand. He always understands when I explain things the right way." Something in her tone made Isabel feel a chill. It was not just pride. It was a sure thing. Lucy knew exactly how to move Alexander, what to say, and when to say it. "For now," Lucy continued, "you can go on with your usual jobs. I just wanted you to be ready." Isabel nodded slowly. She did not trust her voice to answer. She took Thomas in her arms and left the room with slow steps. Only when she reached the second floor and closed the door of the child's room did she let her hands shake. Outside, the first thunder shook the sky. The next morning was clear, but the air was still heavy. Alexander had called during the night to say his return would be late by one more day. Problems with contracts. Isabel heard Lucy answer with a sweet, kind voice perfectly tuned. Isabel ate breakfast early with Thomas in the kitchen, bread with butter, warm milk, small pieces of apple. The child ate slowly, getting his hands dirty, laughing when Isabel cleaned his face with a wet cloth. After, she took him to the main room so he could crawl on the rug while she folded clean clothes. Thomas had recently learned to move with more confidence, crawling toward anything that caught his eye. Lucy appeared mid-morning, dressed in a cream suit, perfect makeup. In her hand she had a cup of coffee she held, as if it were just another part of her outfit. "Isabel, I need you to go to the kitchen. The counter has water spots." Isabel looked at Thomas. The child was happy, looking at the edge of the rug where the fabric changed. "I will be right back, miss. Don't be long." Isabel stood up, paused a moment, then walked to the kitchen. Something inside her screamed to stay, but years of following orders were hard to ignore. She took a clean cloth from the drawer and wet it under the tap. When she returned, the world had stopped. Lucy was standing in the middle of the room. In her right hand, she held the wood cane Alexander used for his health exercises. It was a heavy, solid object with a black rubber handle. The cane was raised over her shoulder. Below, Thomas crawled near her feet, not knowing the danger, making happy sounds. The cloth fell from Isabel's hands. "Miss..." Her voice came out broken, just a whisper. Lucy did not look at her. Her eyes were fixed on the child with a cold focus. "This child needs to learn," Lucy said with a calm voice, as if talking about the weather. "Learn that actions have results, that the world is not soft." "Please," Isabel took a step forward, her legs weak. "He is just a baby. Babies can be shaped. It is the perfect time to teach." Lucy fixed her grip on the cane. "Fear is a good teacher, Isabel. More than love, more than patience. Fear is remembered." Isabel fell to her knees. She did not plan it. Her body just gave up before the terror that went through her. "Please, Miss Montgomery, please, do not hurt him." Thomas, as if he finally felt the tension, stopped crawling. He looked up at Lucy, then at Isabel. His bottom lip began to shake. A small cry escaped his throat. Lucy took a step closer. "This is not personal," she went on, her voice scary and calm. "It is needed. If I want a life with Alexander, this block needs to know his place." Isabel dragged her knees over the floor. The cold of the floor burned her skin through her dress. Her hands came together in front of her, shaking. "I beg you, do to me what you want, but not to him. Not to him." Tears ran down her face without control. It was not just fear. It was the total sure feeling that she was seeing something terrible, something that could not be undone. Thomas began to cry. It was not his usual cry, short and easy. It was a high, desperate cry, the sound of a child who feels danger without knowing it. Lucy finally looked at Isabel. There was something in her eyes that was worse than being mean. It was not caring. "You will clean the floor if you force me to." "Do this," she said simply. Isabel could not breathe. The world had shrunk to that moment. The cane raised, the child crying, her own pleas dying in her throat. And then, with a slow movement, Lucy lowered the cane. She did not drop it. She lowered it with control, letting it rest against the floor. Then she knelt by Thomas, who cried with a stiff body, terrified. Lucy put her face near the child's and whispered something in his ear. Isabel could not hear the exact words. She only saw the result. Thomas's crying stopped at once. His eyes got big. He did not stop crying because of comfort. He stopped crying because of shock, because of something he had understood at a basic level, before language. Lucy stood up, fixed her skirt, and looked at Isabel with no feeling. "Remember your place," she said. "Always remember your place." She left the room, taking the cane. Isabel stayed still, on her knees on the cold floor, hands still together. Thomas stayed still too, eyes too open, body shaking. Finally, Isabel crawled to him and took him in her arms. The child did not hug her. He just stayed stiff, looking at nothing, breathing too fast. "It's over," Isabel whispered against his hair. "It's over, my boy. It's over." But she knew it was a lie. Something had broken, and she did not know if it could be fixed again. Isabel went up the stairs with Thomas tight against her chest. The child had stopped shaking, but his silence was worse than any cry. She went into the baby's room and locked the door. It was the first time she had done that. She sat in the rocking chair by the window, rocking slowly. She began to sing the song her mother sang to her when she was a girl, an old song about birds returning in spring. Her voice shook, breaking on some notes, but she did not stop. Slowly, Thomas began to relax. His fingers let go of Isabel's shirt. His breath became deeper. Finally, he fell asleep, but even in dreams his face stayed tight. Isabel watched him for a long time. This child she had cared for since he was born, who knew her smell, her voice, her hands. This child who was not hers but whom she loved as if he were. And she knew with painful clarity that she could no longer be invisible. She had spent her whole life making herself small, taking up the least space possible, without bothering, without asking. She had learned since she was young that women like her, poor, without school, without a powerful family, survived by bowing their heads and working in silence. But this was no longer about her. It was about Thomas. When the child woke up an hour later, Isabel dressed him with care. She put on his favorite blue suit, the one with a little bunny on the chest. She changed him, gave him water in his special cup with a straw. Then she carried him and went down the stairs. She found Lucy in the study, talking on the phone. When she saw Isabel at the door, her face got hard. "What do you want?" she asked with a sharp voice covering the phone. "I need to talk to Mr. Miller," Isabel said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "He is busy." Then I will wait. Lucy narrowed her eyes. She said something quick on the phone and hung up. I don't know what you think you're going to do, Isabel, but I warn you, Alexander trusts me. If you say anything, if you try to cause trouble, you will only get fired immediately. No letters, no money. Do you understand? Isabel nodded slowly. I understand, miss, but I still need to talk to him. Several seconds passed. Lucy studied her face, looking for cracks, weakness. Isabel looked at her directly without looking away. Finally, Lucy let out a short, mean laugh. You are more foolish than I thought, but go ahead. Ruin your life if you want. She left the study, leaving a trail of perfume and threat. Isabel sat down to wait. Thomas played with his fingers, still quiet, but no longer so stiff. 1 hour passed, then 2. The sun was starting to set when she heard Alexander's car in the driveway. Alexander entered the front door dragging a small bag. His shirt was wrinkled, tie loose, the tired look of someone who has spent 3 days working without enough sleep. Lucy came down the stairs immediately, a perfect smile on her face, ready to greet him. But she stopped seeing Isabel standing in the hall holding Thomas. Alexander noticed the tension at once. He had survived in the business world by learning to read spaces, to see what was not said. He looked at Isabel, then at Lucy, then at Isabel again. What's happening? He asked. Lucy spoke first, voice soft and worried. Nothing big, honey. Isabel has been a bit stressed. I think she needs a few days of rest. I don't need rest, Mr. Miller, Isabel broke in. Her voice was not loud, but it was firm. I need to talk to you. It is urgent. Alexander dropped his bag on the floor. Fine. Come into my office. Alexander, seriously, it is nothing that cannot wait, Lucy said, putting a hand on his arm. You are tired. You should... Lucy. His tone was not hard, but it was final. Give me a moment. He went into the office. Isabel followed him with Thomas in her arms. Before closing the door, she saw Lucy's look. Cold, counting, promising results. Alexander sat at his desk, loosening his tie more. Fine. Tell me. Isabel breathed deep. She had not practiced this. She did not know how to turn the terror she had felt into words that sounded real. But when she opened her mouth, it all came out at once. She told him about the threat, about the raised cane, about Lucy's words, cold and planned, about Thomas's cry cutting off suddenly after the whisper. She did not add judgments. She did not accuse more than the facts. She simply told what she had seen, what she had heard. Alexander listened in total silence. His face showed no feeling. When Isabel finished, he stayed still for several seconds. Then he stood up and walked to where she was. He knelt in front of Thomas. The child looked at him, and for the first time since the event began to cry again. But it was a different cry. It was relief. Alexander took his son in his arms. He hugged him against his chest, feeling the weight, the heat, the fast heartbeats. He closed his eyes. Where is the cane? He asked without opening his eyes. I don't know, sir. Find it. Isabel left quickly. She checked the living room, then the study. She found it in Lucy's closet, hidden behind the coats. She took it back to the office. Alexander took it with one hand, weighing it. It was heavy, enough to do real harm. Call Lucy, he said. Tell her to come here. Lucy entered the office with her chin up, perfect posture, but Isabel noticed the slight shake in her hands, the way her eyes moved toward the cane Alexander held. What is this, Alexander? She asked with a hurt tone. Are you going to believe the dreams of a worker before... Show me your hand, he cut in. What? Your right hand. Show it to me. Lucy paused, then put out her hand. Alexander took it softly and turned it. In the palm, just under the thumb, there was a red mark, the print of the rubber grip of the cane. This needs pressure, Alexander said in a low voice. A lot of pressure. I was moving some things. The cane was in the way. In what room? Lucy blinked. In the living room. Isabel says you had it raised. Over Thomas. That is silly. I never... Repeat what you said to my son. Alexander's voice was now a dangerous whisper. When you knelt down, when you whispered in his ear, repeat it. Lucy's face turned white. I don't remember. Then I will help you. Alexander dropped the cane on the desk with a hard hit that made Lucy jump. Isabel says you spoke to him about fear, about teaching him his place, about blocks that need to be moved. She is lying. She is jealous, don't you see? Jealous that I am going to marry you, that I'm going to be part of this family. My son does not hug me." Alexander raised Thomas a bit, and the child immediately held on to him, hiding his face in his neck. "He came back 20 minutes ago and he does not hug me. He is afraid of me." That had never happened. Children have moods. It doesn't mean— "Raise the cane," Alexander ordered suddenly. "What?" "Raise it like you did with my son." The silence became thick. Lucy looked at the cane, then at Alexander, her eyes filled with perfectly timed tears. "I cannot believe you are doing this to me. After all we have planned together. Raise it." Lucy reached her hand toward the cane but pulled it back before touching it. "I cannot," she whispered, "because you know exactly what it means." Alexander walked to the desk phone. "I am going to call security. They will have to take you to get your things." "Alexander, please." Lucy took a step forward, the mask of calm totally broken. "It was a moment of stress. I was not going to really hurt him. I just wanted to scare him a bit, so he would learn." "Learn what?" "It was not a question." Lucy opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she looked down. "That I am more important than him." The truth, naked and mean, hung in the air. Alexander dialed the security number. "Please, come to the main office. I need you to take Miss Montgomery off the property." Lucy backed away, her face falling apart. "You are going to regret this. No one will believe you. I have contacts, power. Get out of my house." 2 security men arrived in minutes. Lucy went with them with a stiff back, trying to keep her pride while her world fell down. Before crossing the door, she turned to Isabel. "This is your fault," she hissed. "I wish—" But she did not finish. The guards led her softly but firmly toward the exit. When the noise of the front door closing rang through the house, Alexander let himself fall into the chair. Thomas was still held onto him, shaking a bit. Isabel stayed standing by the window, not knowing what to do. "Isabel!" Alexander called without looking at her. "Yes, sir. Thank you." She felt the tears coming, but she held them back. "You don't have to thank me, sir. You saved my son." Finally he looked at her, and there were tears in his eyes too. "Not just from what could have happened today. You saved him from growing up with fear, from learning that love comes with violence. I don't know how to pay you for that." "You don't need to pay me anything." Isabel stepped closer slowly. "Just let me keep caring for him." Alexander nodded, unable to speak. The following days were strangely silent. Lucy's absence left a space that the house took time to fix. Isabel noticed small changes. The flowers Lucy had demanded were replaced by simpler plants. The expensive perfume stopped filling the halls. The constant tension melted away slowly like fog under the sun. It took Thomas a week to laugh again. It was a small sound, just a soft laugh, when Isabel made shadows on the wall, but it was enough. Alexander, who worked from home those days, heard the sound from the hall and had to lean against the wall, relieved. Isabel continued her routine with one big difference. Now Alexander took part. He ate breakfast with Thomas in the mornings, bathed him at night, and read stories he could not yet understand but whose rhythm calmed him. He learned to tell his different cries apart, to know when he was hungry versus when he was sleepy. And he learned to trust Isabel completely. One afternoon, while having tea in the garden, Alexander spoke directly. "I want you to be his official nanny, not just a worker, with a contract, benefits, all legal." Isabel almost dropped her cup. "Mr. Miller, I don't have certificates. I didn't study. You have something better than certificates. You have love for my son and courage to protect him even when it cost you everything." He paused. "Besides, Thomas needs you. I see it in how he looks for you, in how he calms down when you arrive. That is not learned in any school." Isabel felt heat in her chest, a mix of thanks and duty. "I will do my best, sir, I promise you." "I know." Time passed in a strange way, as it always does with children, slow in individual days, fast looking back. Thomas turned 2, then 3. He began to talk, to walk, to ask endless questions about everything. Isabel answered with infinite patience, teaching him names of trees, shapes of clouds, old songs. Alexander kept traveling for work, but never more than 3 days in a row. He had learned his lesson. Business was important, yes, but nothing beat the weight of his son in his arms, asking for one more story before sleep. He did not look for a partner again. When people asked, and they asked, especially the women at business dinners who saw a successful and single man as a goal. He smiled politely and said he was focused on being a father. It was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Lucy's betrayal had left a scar, the sure feeling that not everyone loved his son as they should. Isabel became an unreplaceable part of the family, not by title or by blood, but by constant presence. She was the one who listened to Thomas's night fears about monsters under the bed, who fixed scraped knees with such care that the boy forgot to cry, who celebrated every small win as if it were huge. When Thomas turned 5, he started kindergarten. Isabel went with him every morning, waited in the car, and picked him up with hugs. Other mothers watched her with curiosity, some with hate, few with respect. Isabel paid them no mind. Her job was not to impress strangers. It was to take care of Thomas. One afternoon, the teacher asked to talk to Alexander. Isabel waited outside, nervous, imagining problems. But when they came out, Alexander was smiling. She says Thomas is the most kind boy in the class, that he always helps the new kids feel included. He looked at Isabel with what seemed like wonder. She asked where he had learned that. Isabel felt heat in her cheeks. I didn't teach him anything special, just to be kind. That is everything, Alexander said softly, and it is all. Thomas was 7 years old when the letter came. Isabel found it in the mailbox between bills and junk mail. The envelope was thick, cream paper, with Lucy Montgomery's name printed in the top left corner. Return address, New York. Isabel felt the floor move under her feet. She did not open the letter. She took it directly to Alexander, who was working in his office. He took the envelope, weighed it, and looked at it against the light. Finally, he opened it with a letter opener. He read in silence. His face showed no feeling. When he finished, he folded the letter again and put it in a drawer that he locked. What does it say, sir? Isabel asked, unable to stop herself. It says she got married, that she has a daughter, that she has been in therapy, and now understands she had control and jealousy problems. Alexander leaned back in his chair. She says she wants to say sorry. She doesn't ask to come back, just for pardon. Isabel did not know what to say. Are you going to answer? Alexander shook his head. There are things that are not forgiven with letters. They are forgiven with time and space. She can have her peace with her own heart. I already have mine. He looked at Isabel. And I have something more important. A son who sleeps calm, because he never had to learn to be afraid of me. The letter stayed in that drawer. It was never mentioned again. Thomas turned 10 years old in February when winter was starting to give way to the first promises of spring. For weeks, Alexander had planned the party with a joy Isabel had not seen in years. There was something different in him now, a lightness that did not exist when Thomas was a baby. Time had smoothed the edges of fear, replacing them with something more solid. Trust. Isabel had spent 3 days preparing everything. The south garden of the house was changed with blue and silver lines hanging from the trees, catching the winter sun in their bright faces. There were balloons in groups, tables covered with white cloths, and a dance floor on the grass where the kids could run free. The cake had been her biggest project. 3 floors of chocolate, raspberry filling, covered with blue icing decorated with gold stars. It had taken her 2 full days. Her hands still smelled of vanilla and butter when the day of the party came. At 4, in the afternoon, the guests started to arrive. Kids from Thomas's school, loud and full of energy, running between the trees with high laughs. Teachers who had seen Thomas grow since kindergarten, now seeing his change into a thoughtful and kind boy. Neighbors from nearby houses, curious to see how the Miller family celebrated. Isabel moved among them as she always had, present but invisible. She filled glasses of lemonade, took away empty plates, and made sure no child was without a piece of pizza. She wore her newest grey dress, the one Alexander had given her the year before, but she still felt like what she was, part of the staff, not part of the party. Thomas, however, seemed to look for her all the time. Every time he got a point in the games, he turned toward where Isabel was, looking for her okay. She always nodded, smiling, with the pride of one who has seen every small step of that growth. When the sun started to go down, painting the sky orange and pink, it was time for the cake. Alexander lit the 10 candles while the guests gathered around the main table, starting to sing. Thomas was standing in front of the cake, with the light of the candles reflecting in his dark eyes. so like his father's. But when the song ended and everyone waited for him to blow, he did not move. "Someone is missing," he said with a clear voice, loud so everyone heard. Alexander looked around, confused. He counted. His closest friends were there, the family, the important teachers. "All your friends are here, son, and your family." "Isa is missing," Thomas repeated, this time pointing directly to where Isabel had stopped by the drinks table several feet away. An awkward silence fell over the garden. The kids looked without knowing what was happening. The adults swapped looks Isabel knew well. Surprise, hidden dislike, confusion about the right way to act. An older woman, a neighbor from 2 houses down, frowned and whispered something to her husband. Isabel felt the heat rise in her neck. She wanted to make herself even smaller, to vanish in the shadows of the trees. "Thomas, I am here," she said softly, trying not to call more attention. "I am fine where I am, my boy." "But you aren't here for real." The boy pointed to the main table, where there were 3 empty chairs next to Alexander's. "I want you to be here, with us." Alexander understood at once. It was not a child's whim. It was a statement. His son, at 10 years old, was drawing a line on what family meant in his world. He stood up from his chair and walked through the guests to where Isabel was. He could feel the eyes following him, the low sound of talk. He did not care. "Come," he said, putting out his hand. "Please." Isabel shook her head, ashamed, aware of every eye watching her. "Mr. Miller, it is not right. The guests will think that I am forgetting my place. Your place is where my son says it is." Alexander's voice was firm but warm. "And he says it is here." Thomas had left his spot in front of the cake and was now with Isabel, taking her other hand. His fingers were warm, sure. "Isa, when I was small and had bad dreams, you came. When I fell from the tree and broke my arm, you stayed in the hospital all night, even though the doctors said it was not needed. When Dad had to travel to Japan for 2 weeks and I cried because I missed him, you sang to me until I slept." He paused, his eyes shining with held tears. "You are part of my family, the most important part. And today I want everyone to know." Isabel felt something break inside her chest. Years of staying in the background, of accepting without question that her love for this child must be silent and kept, of never asking for more than she was given. And now he was giving her something she never dared to dream of. Public honor. She looked at the faces watching her. Some still disliked it. The older woman now whispered more loudly with her husband. Others seemed confused. But there were some, the few who really knew the Miller family, who smiled with real pride. Mrs. Smith, Thomas's 3rd-grade teacher, wiped a tear from her cheek. Mr. Green, the gardener of the next property, who had seen Isabel care for Thomas for years, nodded with respect. Finally, Isabel let Alexander lead her. She walked through the guests with her head high, not from pride but from dignity. She sat in the chair Thomas had kept for her, between him and his father. "Now it is right," Thomas said, going back to his spot in front of the cake. "Now my family is complete." The candles burned low when everyone started to sing again. This time, when it was time to blow, Thomas leaned toward Isabel. "Help me," he whispered. She shook her head, smiling through the tears. "It is your moment, my boy. It is our moment." Alexander leaned in too, knowing. The 3 of them blew together, putting out the 10 flames in one breath. The guests clapped, some with more joy than others, but the sound filled the garden. Like a party not just for a birthday, but for something deeper, the redefining of what it meant to belong. Later, when the guests started to leave and the garden lights came on against the dark sky, the older woman came to Isabel. Her face had changed. There was no more dislike, but something that seemed like real curiosity. "Forgive my past ignorance," she said simply. "I did not know the whole story. My husband told me about what you did for this child when he was a baby." She paused, looking for the words. "There are many kinds of mothers in this world. You are one of the good ones." Isabel did not know how to answer. She nodded a bit, accepting the words as the unexpected gift they were. When everyone left, and only the 3 of them were under the stars, around flat balloons and tables to be cleaned, Thomas fell asleep on the garden sofa, tired from joy. Isabel covered him with a light blanket, fixing his hair with care. "Thank you for today," Alexander said in a low voice, standing by her. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. My son just taught me something I should have done years ago." He looked toward the starry sky. to show publicly what I always knew in private, that without you, none of this would exist. Isabel felt a lump in her throat. I only did what anyone would do. No. Alexander shook his head softly. You did what very few people have the courage to do. And today, my son gave you the place you always earned. They stayed there in comfortable silence, two people joined by the love for a child who breathed softly under the stars, dreaming maybe of a world where love did not need reasons or sorries. It only needed to be seen. 2 years later, when Thomas was 12 years old, and his voice started to break in that middle ground between childhood and being a teen, the question came that Isabel had known would come eventually, but for which she had never found the right answer. It was a March afternoon, with that gold light that comes before spring. Isabel was in the kitchen making dinner, roast lamb with herbs, Thomas's favorite, while he did his math work at the table. Outside it rained softly, that kind of rain that does not wet so much as it whispers. Isa, why did you never get married? Thomas asked without looking up from his book, as if the question were as easy as asking the time. Isabel stopped cutting the potatoes. The question was simple, but complex in all it meant. Where does that question come from, my boy? At school, my friend Daniel says it is weird that you live with us but are not family for real, that normal people have their own family. Finally, he looked up. But I told him you are family for real, and he asked why you aren't married to Dad then. Isabel felt heat in her cheeks. She dried her hands on her apron and sat across from him, looking for the right words. I have family, Thomas. I have you and your father, but I understand what you mean. She paused. I had a boyfriend a long time ago before I came to work here. His name was Robert. Thomas put down his pencil, giving her all his care. He was a good man. He worked in building, had strong hands and a laugh that filled whole rooms. Isabel smiled at the memory. We wanted to marry, have a small house in town, maybe 3 or 4 kids. What happened? He died in an accident. A beam fell at the place where he worked. He was 26 years old. Thomas's face softened with a knowing that seemed too old for his age. I'm very sorry, Isa. Me too, for a long time. Isabel put out her hand and softly touched Thomas's. After that, I focused on working. It did not seem right to start something new when my heart was still in another place. But that was a long time ago, right? Almost 30 years. Isabel nodded. And in between, I found something I did not expect. Not a husband, not kids of my own. But I found a baby who cried in the night and who needed someone to always answer him, without fail. And I decided that was enough for me. Thomas thought about this in silence. His brows gathered as he always did when he thought hard. Did you ever regret it? Not having your own family? Never. Not once. Isabel squeezed his hand. Because I do have my own family. I have you guys. The boy smiled, happy with the answer. He went back to his math. But a few minutes later, without looking up, he said, When I am big and have my own house, I am going to design a special room for you, with big windows, so you can see your garden, and you will never, ever have to leave. Isabel felt her heart grow inside her chest, too big for her body. That would be very beautiful, Thomas. It is a promise. And she knew it was. Thomas was 15 years old when he finally asked to know the whole truth. He was no longer the child who accepted partial answers or half-truths. He had grown tall, with the wide shoulders of his father and the watching eyes that questioned everything. One afternoon, while Isabel folded clothes in her room, he appeared at the door with a serious look. I want you to tell me what really happened with Lucy. Isabel felt time stop. 14 years had passed since that day, but the memory was still fresh, like a cut that never fully closed. Your father never wanted you to know the details. I am not a child anymore. I have the right to know my own story. Thomas entered and closed the door. Please, Isa. I need to understand. Isabel dropped the shirt she held and looked at him. She saw the young man he was now, but also the baby he had been, and she knew she could not keep shielding him from a truth that was his. She told him everything, with the quiet voice of one who has made peace with the past. The raised cane, Lucy's cold words about fear as a teacher, her own knees on the floor begging, the terrible silence when Thomas's cry stopped suddenly after the whisper. Thomas listened without stopping her, but his hands pressed into fists on his lap. When she finished, there were tears in his eyes. She was going to... He could not finish the line. We will never know for sure. Your father arrived before anything worse could happen. But you knew. You knew it could cost you your job, your home, everything. And yet you spoke. There was no other choice. Isabel touched his cheek. Not when it came to you. Thomas hugged her then, with the strength of a young man who finally knows the size of silent sacrifices. You saved my life. And more than that, you saved me from growing up with fear, from thinking that love comes with violence. His voice broke. I don't know how to thank you for that. By living it well, by being good, that is all the thanks I need. When Thomas left that night, Isabel stayed sitting at the window looking at the stars. There was something freeing in finally sharing the weight of that memory. It was no longer just hers. It was part of the story of both, a bridge between the past and present that joined them in ways blood never could. 5 years later, Thomas graduated in architecture with honors from the University of North Carolina. At 20 years old, he had designed his final project with a passion that surprised even his hardest teachers. A modern house with clean lines, big windows that caught the light at every hour of the day, and spaces that moved together naturally. But there was something in that design that caught the eye. On the ground floor, clearly marked and separate from the rest, there was a room with generous size facing south and direct access to the garden. When his teacher asked about the goal of that room so specifically designed, Thomas simply answered, "It is for the most important person in my life." Alexander had gone to the final talk, sitting in the last row of the college hall, watching his son explain with sure knowing every design choice. When he saw that special room on the plans, he felt a lump in his throat. He knew exactly who it was for. The night of the graduation, Thomas said no to all the invites from his friends to celebrate in fancy places downtown. Instead, he made a small dinner at the house in Charleston, the same stone house where he had grown up, where he had learned to walk, to talk, to understand what it meant to be loved without limits. Isabel had spent 2 days preparing everything, not because Thomas asked, he had insisted on hiring help, but because she did not know how to show her pride any other way. She made every favorite dish Thomas had had at different times in his life, the snacks he loved at 5 years old, the roast lamb of his teens, the egg dessert he always asked for on special days. The guests started to arrive at sunset. College friends, teachers who had seen his talent since day one, Mrs. Smith, now retired but still with that warm smile that had stayed with Thomas during his first school years, neighbors who had seen him grow since he was a baby. In the center of the dining room, under the glass light that had lit so many family dinners, there was a long table with 2 main chairs at the head. Alexander and Isabel looked at each other with confusion when Thomas asked them to sit there, one next to the other. "Son, that is for the main guests," Alexander said with a puzzled smile. "Exactly," Thomas answered. When everyone was seated and the glasses full of red wine, Thomas stood up. The sound of talk faded slowly until only a waiting silence was left. He took his glass, but did not drink. Right away. First he looked around at all those faces that had been part of his trip, and then he fixed his look on the 2 people at the head. "Tonight, I want to do something different," he began, his voice firm but full of feeling. "Everyone is here to celebrate my graduation, and I thank you deeply. But I want to celebrate something more important. I want to celebrate the 2 people who taught me everything I know about what really matters in life." Alexander looked down, awkward with the attention. Isabel kept her hands together on her lap, holding back the tears that were already coming. "Dad," Thomas turned to him, "you taught me that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. That business can wait, but a son cannot. You taught me that admitting a mistake takes more heart than hiding it behind excuses and pride." He paused, his voice breaking a bit. "And you taught me that a father's love is not counted in expensive gifts or big words, but in being present. Just being there over and over without fail." Alexander looked up. His eyes were bright. "But there is someone else here, someone many of you know, but whose full story maybe you do not understand." Thomas turned to Isabel, and the whole room followed his look. "Isabel Smith arrived at this house 20 years ago as a houseworker. My father hired her to keep a large, empty house clean, but she did much more than that." Isabel felt the air turn thick. She did not know what was coming, but something in Thomas's tone told her he was about to share truths that had stayed private for a long time. "When I was 11 months old," Thomas went on, his voice now firmer, "someone tried to hurt me. I am not going to give names because forgiveness is also part of what they taught me, But that person raised a cane over me, a helpless baby, while saying words about fear and discipline that no child should hear. A murmur went through the table. Some guests leaned forward, others swapped looks of shock. Isabel saw what was happening, and in that moment, she had a choice. She could stay quiet, protect her job, her home, her safety, or she could speak, risking it all for someone who could not even thank her. Thomas walked slowly toward where Isabel was. She knelt on the cold floor of the living room. She did not care that her knees hurt or that her pride was stepped on. She begged, she cried. She put herself between me and the danger with nothing but her love and her heart. Isabel closed her eyes, tears running free now. 20 years of keeping that story saved, of carrying that weight in silence, and now it was being shown before all these eyes. And after, Thomas went on, his own voice breaking, when it would have been easier to tell herself she had done enough, that it was not her job to go further, Isabel made the hardest choice of all. She told my father the truth, knowing they might not believe her, that they could fire her anyway, that she could lose everything. Alexander had stood up now, a hand pressed against his mouth, eyes closed tight. She saved me, not just from a moment of violence, but from growing up in a home where fear replaced love, where I learned that the people who care for you can also hurt you, where silence was worth more than the truth. Thomas knelt by Isabel's chair, taking her hands in his. Isa, you are not my worker. You are not just my nanny. You are my second mother in every way that word can mean. Isabel sobbed openly, now not caring who saw her. Thomas went on, his voice just a whisper that somehow filled the whole room. You taught me that family is not just blood. That true love is the one that stays when the world gets hard, not the one that only shows up when everything is easy. You taught me that dignity does not come from how much money you have or what last name you carry, but from how you treat people when no one is looking. He squeezed her hands. And you taught me that courage does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it kneels on a cold floor and begs for someone smaller. Sometimes it just decides not to be quiet when silence would be much, much easier. He stood up, helping Isabel rise with him. He raised his glass to the ceiling. So I toast to my father, who gave me life and taught me how to be strong. And I toast to Isabel, my second mother, who taught me how to be human. I love you both more than any word could say. The clap that followed was like thunder. Some guests were standing. Others wiped tears from their own faces. Mrs. Smith had covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing. Even the young friends of Thomas, who had arrived expecting a casual party, were clearly moved. Alexander walked toward Isabel and Thomas. Without a word, he wrapped them both in a hug that held 20 years of thanks, trust, and imperfect but real love. Thank you, Alexander whispered against Isabel's hair. Thank you for never giving up on us. The dinner went on with a new warmth. The guests came to Isabel one by one, some to say they admired her, others just to shake her hand in silent knowing. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the staff. She was, as Thomas had said publicly, a vital part of this family. Later, long after the last guest left and the dining room lights were turned off, Isabel went out to the garden. The night was clear, full of stars that blinked like silent witnesses to all that had happened. Alexander found her there, sitting on the stone bench he had put in years ago. May I? He asked, pointing to the space next to her. Of course. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the bugs and the whisper of the wind in the trees. I never said it to you right, Alexander finally spoke. What you did that day, Isabel, you did not just save my son. You saved me too. You saved me from making the worst mistake of my life, from bringing someone into this house who would have destroyed everything good left in it. It's over, Mr. Miller, a long time ago. Alexander, he smiled in the dark. After 20 years and my son calling you his second mother in front of all our friends, I think you can call me Alexander. Isabel let out a soft, almost shy laugh. Alexander, better. He looked toward the house where the lights of Thomas's room still shone. You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had decided to stay quiet that day, if you had thought it was not worth risking. Your job, your home. I could not stay quiet. Isabel shook her head. The moment I saw that cane raised, it stopped being a choice. It was just what I had to do. There is the difference between good people and great ones. Alexander looked at her with a force that surprised her. Good people do the right thing when it is easy. Great ones do it when it costs them everything. They stayed there as the hours moved toward dawn, two people who had raised a child together without books or maps, who had made a family that fought all normal rules, but worked exactly because it was based on something more solid than blood. Choice, respect, and love that asked for nothing back. Isabel thought of the girl she had been, growing up in a poor town, without school, without hopes beyond living day to day. She thought of Robert, the love she lost before it could fully grow, and she wondered if from somewhere he could see her now, sitting in this elegant garden, a key part of a family that loved her without limits. She thought of that terrible day when the cane was raised over a helpless baby, and the whole world turned into a desperate plea. And she thought of Thomas now, a bright and kind young man, ready to build his own life on grounds of love, respect, and truth. "You know what shocks me most," Alexander said suddenly, "is that Thomas has no fear, not of people, not of trusting, not of loving openly. Many kids who go through bad times carry those scars their whole life, but he doesn't. Because you arrived in time," Isabel answered softly, "and because after that you showed him that what happened was the rare thing, not the rule, that the world can be safe when the right people protect you. We showed him. Together." Isabel nodded, finally taking the honor she had moved away from for years. A falling star crossed the sky, leaving a trail of silver light that lasted just a second before vanishing. "Make a wish," Alexander said, pointing to the sky. Isabel closed her eyes, but she did not ask for anything, because looking back at the path that had brought her from that poor girl to this garden under the stars, she realized she already had everything she could have ever wished for. There was no fame or money, she did not have her name on buildings or titles after her name, but she had something infinitely more valuable. She had changed the course of a life. She had saved a child, not just from immediate danger, but from a future marked by pain and doubt. She had taught with acts more than words that true love does not scream or ask for honor. It simply kneels when needed, speaks when silence would be wrong, and stays present day after day, year after year, without counting the cost. Not all acts of courage are seen. Not all heroes get medals or appear in stories people tell. Some just decide, at a vital moment where everything is at risk, that there is something more important than their own safety. Some just refuse to be invisible when being seen could save everything. And that, as the night went on over Charleston and the stars continued their dance over their heads, was more than enough. It was everything. It was exactly what it was meant to be. It was a life well lived.